Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. In this video I'll be sharing the pattern drafting process of this halter neck corset blouse with yoke. So the sewing process will be shared in the part 2 of this video, so please stay tuned for that. So to begin, I have gone ahead to mark out my vertical measurements on my pattern paper. The measurements that I'm working with will be on the screen. So right here is the front part of my pattern and this is the back. So I'm just going ahead to mark out my zipper allowance at the back of my pattern. So once I'm done, I'll put the back away and I'll begin drafting the front pattern. On my waistline, I'm going ahead to mark half of my bust part measurement plus half an inch. So I'll do the same thing on my under bust line and also mark the same thing on my bust point line, and then I'll connect the lines together. Now I'll just go ahead and find the midpoint of my armhole. That will be 4 inches, and I will go inwards by 0.75 inch right there. After that, at my blouse length, I will also mark half of my bust part measurement plus half an inch, and then from my waistline I will connect the lines together. Right there at my waistline, I will go ahead and mark 0.75 inch on both sides of the line. Then I will mark 2 inches above my blouse length. This will be where the dart will end. So after marking that, I will go to my under bust line right there and mark 1 inch on both sides of the line. Then I will come down by 1 inch from my bust point line. And then I'll go ahead and connect all the points together like this. On my waistline, I will go ahead and mark a quarter of my waist circumference. That will be 8 inches. And that dart of 1.5 inches, I will go ahead and replace the dart right there. Make sure you replace yours. And after that, I would add 1 inch side seam allowance to my waistline. Then at my blouse length line, I will go ahead and mark the quarter of the circumference of that area. That is 40 divided by 4. That will be 10 inches. And then I will add 1 inch to my side seam allowance. And then on my chest line, right there, I will go ahead and mark a quarter of my bust circumference. That will be 9.5 inches. And then I will also add 1 inch side seam allowance. And now I'll connect all the points together. After that, on my chest line, I will go upwards by 1.5 inches, and then I will go ahead and create my armhole curve. From this point, I will make a connection down to this point on my chest line. So I will go ahead and place the ruler this way from this point right here, making sure that the ruler cuts across this 1.5 inch mark. So I'll go ahead and connect the lines together. This will create the halter neck for the blouse. I will mark 1 inch above my bust point line in a slanted manner. And then from the tip of my armhole, I will make a straight connection down to my bust point line like this. After connecting the lines, I would make sure that there are no sharp edges along that area. So now I would measure from my shoulder line to this point where the two lines meet. I have 5.5 inches. So I'll mark that right there and mark that across that area. After connecting the lines, at this point, I will go ahead and mark 0.75 inch on both sides of the line. This is so as to contour the area so that it doesn't gape. So now I would connect the lines all the way down to my bust point line, like this. From this point right here, I would measure what I have all the way down to my bust point line. As you can see, I have 6.5 inches. So I will also measure the other line. What I have is 5.5. So the difference is 1 inch. So I will need to make an extension of 1 inch on the second line like this, so that I'm not short of measurement. So I'll go ahead and extend the lines together like this. So on my chest line, as you can see, I have a dart right there. So I'll measure what I have from the edge or the center front of my paper to that line. Whatever I have, I'll place it on the second line like this, and then remeasure or remark the quarter of my bust circumference, and then I'll add 1 inch to that. And now I'll go ahead and reconnect the lines back into my waistline. So at this point, I'll go ahead and mark my bust dart of 1 inch below my bust point line. After my blouse length line, if you notice, there is half an inch seam allowance for the hem. So I would go ahead and mark 4 inches below my waistline like this. This is where I want the side of the blouse to end. Now I'll place my ruler this way, making sure that it is on the hemming allowance of half an inch. So from my side seam, I'll connect the lines together. So after that, on my chest line, I will go downwards by 1 inch and then go inwards by half an inch like this. And I will place the curved part of my ruler on my underbust, and from my side seam allowance of 1 inch, I would make a connection like this. I will do the same thing on the other side. So I'll place the curved part of my ruler on my underbust and connect the points all the way to that half inch mark right there. So after connecting, I realized that the space for the cup is too small, so I'll just go in and create more room for the bust. Now I'll just cut through this line all the way to 1 inch below my bust point line. And after that, I'll go ahead and close my bust dart. After closing the bust dart, I'll go ahead and close this dart right here at the armhole area. So I'll place this part that has been folded right onto this part that has that 1 inch extension line like this, and once I'm done, I'll seal that place with my paper tape. I'll just go back in and reconnect this line from my side seam down to my underbust. And I'll extend this line right here along the armhole area, and then I'll place my ruler like this on the 1.5 inch mark and then connect the line down to this point below my chest line. This will create the cleavage area for the corset. So once I'm done, I'll also go back in and reconnect these lines together so that it is more visible. So now that is done, I'll go ahead and cut out the front pattern like this. Now that I'm done cutting them out, I'll go ahead and label this part as the front yoke, and this will be C1 as in cup 1 and C2 as cup 2. This will be P1 as in panel 1 and P2 as in panel 2. So these are all the pattern pieces for the front. So I'll go ahead and put them aside and begin drafting the back. For the back, the neck width is 3 inches, while the neck depth is 1 inch. So on my waistline, I'll go ahead and mark half of my bust span measurement plus half an inch. And I would mark the same thing right there at my blouse length line and also on my chest line. After that, I would mark 1 inch below my chest line. Then I'll connect the 3 points together. Right here, I'm just going to mark 2 inches above my blouse length line, but after a while, I changed that to 1 inch. So on my waistline, I'll go ahead and mark ½ inch on both sides of the line to create my dart. So while connecting the line to the 2 inch mark below my blouse length, I decided to change that to 1 inch because this is the back. So the dart will stop 1 inch above my blouse length line, and then I'll go back and connect the waist dart downwards to that point. On my chest line, I'll go ahead and mark 1/4 of my bust circumference, which is 9.5, and 1 inch for the side seam allowance. And then I will go ahead and find the midpoint of my armhole, and I will go inwards by ½ an inch right there. Next, I will also mark 1.5 inch above my chest line, and I'll create the armhole curve for the back. So now I'll place my ruler this way on the neck width, and then I will connect the lines all the way to the point on my chest line, making sure that the line crosses the 1.5 inch mark above my chest line. So I'll go ahead and find the midpoint of my shoulder slant. So once I get that, I would mark that right there on the line, and then I will make a straight connection from that point down to the 1 inch mark below my chest line. Since this is the back, I would need to make that connection as straight as possible so as not to create any extra room at the back. So I'm just going back in to make that line as straight as possible. So once that is done, at this point, I will go ahead and contour that area by 1 inch. So now I'll connect the line back into the line right there. After that, I would measure what I have for the dart right there on my chest line. I have ½ an inch, so I'll go back to my measurement on my chest line and replace that right there, and then mark my side seam allowance of 1 inch. Then on my chest line, I would make a connection down to the dart on my waistline like this. Then after that, I would measure what I have from that point to the first dart line. Whatever I have, I will take it to the second line like this, and then I'll mark 1/4 of my waist circumference, which is 8 inches, and then 1 inch for my side seam allowance. Then on my blouse length line, I will also go ahead and mark 1/4 of the circumference of that area. That is 10 inches, just like the front. And then I'll add 1 inch for my side seam allowance. Then I'll go ahead and connect the points together. Now I will go ahead and measure what I have from this point down to my waistline. I have 12.5 inches. I would also measure the other line. What I have is 11.5, so I need to make an extension of 1 inch on the second line so that I'm not short of measurement. So after that is done, I will go ahead and mark 4 inches below my waistline, just like I did for the front, so that the side seam matches up together. And then I would place my ruler this way and make a connection down to that point at my blouse length. I was supposed to do this to the ½ inch mark below the blouse length, but later on I would make that correction. So now I'll go ahead and cut through this line all the way to somewhere around this area, and then I'll go ahead and close this dart along the armhole area. So it's just the same process for the front, just that I contour the front by 1.5 inches. So I'll use my paper tape to seal this place shut, and then I'll go back in and reconnect this line along the armhole area like this. So once that is done, I would measure 2 inches below my chest line, and from the 1.5 inch mark above my chest line, I would make that connection downwards. So once that is done, I would label here as the back yoke, and then I'll go ahead to cut out the back yoke. So guys, at this point I just realized the mistake, and then I'm making the connection to the 1/2 inch mark below my blouse length, making sure that the line connects together like this. And once that is done, I'll go ahead and cut out the rest of the back pattern like this. Now I'll go ahead and label this part of my pattern as BP1 back panel 1, and this is BP2 back panel 2, and I'll use an arrow sign to indicate the areas where I'll be adding 1/2 inch seam allowance while cutting on my fabric. So I'll also do the same thing for the front. Using an arrow sign, I will indicate the areas where I'll be adding 1/2 inch seam allowance while cutting on my fabric. Now for the collar that will be attached to the neckline of the yoke, I'll go ahead and measure the neckline of the front yoke. What I have is 4 3/8 of an inch. Now I'll also do the same for the back. Note that I'm also measuring the zipper allowance of the back. So I also have 4 3/8 of an inch for the back too. So my pattern paper, I will go ahead and first mark the neckline of the front, which is 4 3/8 of an inch right there, and this part will be the CF. So I'll also go ahead and mark out the back neckline, which is 4 3/8 of an inch, and right there at this point I will go upwards by 1/2 of an inch. So I've marked that. Then I'll connect from the back neckline down to the front neckline with the curved part of my ruler. So what I'm going to do next is that I'll mark 1.5 inch for the collar width. I'll mark that across the area all the way to the back neckline. So then I'll also connect the lines together like this. So I'll go ahead and also mark the front neckline at this point, and also remark the back neckline at this point, and then I'll connect the back neckline points together like this. At this point right here, don't forget that I have added the allowance for my zipper right there. So I'll just go ahead and mark out my 1 inch zipper allowance at the back neckline area. After that, I'll go ahead and cut out the collar from the pattern like this. So I'll be adding 1/2 inch seam allowance to the lower part of the collar. For the center front, I will not be cutting it on the fold, but I just wrote out the sign right there. So I'll add 1/2 inch to the upper part, and to the zipper allowance area, there'll be no need to add any seam allowance right there. So I'll just bring the two yokes together and place them like this, and I'll be cutting out 2 pieces of the collar, and for the back yoke I'll be cutting out 4 pieces of it. For the front, I'm supposed to cut out 2 pieces. I don't know when I wrote 4, maybe because I wrote 4 for the back. So this is how the collar will be attached to the 2 yoke while sewing on my fabric. So guys, the part 2 of this video will be posted after this one, so please stay tuned as I take you through the sewing process of the corset. So I'll see you in my next video.